All right. Welcome to another episode of the Endo Babe Podcast. I'm so excited. Today we're chatting with Jessica Debrowski, really about her journey through anxiety and really just turning her entire life around is what it seems like. You've had such an incredible story, an incredible, I guess, rags to riches story is kind of what I'm going to call it. And just really coming at a halt at something like happening in your life and deciding that that's not how you wanted your life to go and making that change. And I've had kind of a similar story, so I'm really excited to dive into that. But welcome, Jessica. Let's start out with you just giving the audience a little taste of who you are and why you got into doing what you're doing right now.
Yeah. Oh, well, I could talk about this for like 4 hours, but we're going to try to keep it short. But first, Chelsea, thank you for having me on your podcast. And yeah, rags to riches. I guess I've never heard of my story like referred to in that way, but I'll play off of that a little bit. So I guess in rags to riches is not necessarily in wealth, like money, like the way that a lot of people think of it. Although I do have goals of making a lot of money through what I'm passionate about and through what I've found is like my gift to do. But rags to riches more in terms of the like wealth within myself, and within happiness, like, and within wealth beyond like material things is what I have so much more of now. And that journey really started with what seemed like I guess you could call like a typical childhood. I grew up in like a lower middle class home in Long Island in New York. And my parents are both from Poland. Or my dad was born here, but his parents were from Poland. And so were all of his brothers. And so I'm a first generation American. Like a lot of people here in the US have families full of immigrants. And so I grew up with around the culture and around the attitude of sink or swim kind of thing. Like I'm throwing you in the deep end, but rather than like I'm throwing you in the deep end and saying, yeah, you can do it. You got this. Like I believe in you. It was more just like, this is going to harden you up for life kind of thing. And so I grew up very much like with that kind of culture. And I know that a lot of people have like grown up with parents that showed them love through making them do things on their own and creating very, very independent children. And so that was me. I'm the oldest out of all my siblings. And I grew up being like the best student in the class, like all the time. I was the overachiever. I was the perfect student. I was, the gifted student, the one who was always trying really, really hard. And to be honest, most of my life, I felt really alone. And looking back on it, I did a lot of that overachieving and a lot of that working so hard because I was trying to get love through awards and achievements, but no matter how many I got, it didn't fill like the emptiness within me. Yeah. And so really and where that emptiness kind of came from was my dad was an alcoholic all of my life, as far back as I can remember. And he passed away about 4 years ago now, which was in my first year of graduate school. So I was on track. I was doing so well in science, math, all my classes. I went to an elite liberal arts college, Tufts University in Boston. And then I was at grad school at MIT. So like I was, doing all the things that people should do. Everybody was so proud of me. And actually, I was actually just writing a post on my Instagram about this yesterday. Like everyone was proud of me and everyone was so happy for me. And everyone was like, you're doing so great. And like, you should be so proud and everything. You're so awesome. And I was like, am I fucking awesome? I don't feel like I am. I woke up every day feeling that emptiness. And along the whole way, I mean, I'm sure we'll get into this, but I had anxiety and I didn't even know it. Like I had what was called, what my therapist called high functioning anxiety. So it looked like I was fine, right? I had the grades, I had the boyfriends, I had a skinny body, I had all this kind of stuff. And I performed really well at work and at school and around people, but on the inside, my brain would not shut off, and I was perpetually unhappy. And so when my dad passed away my first year of graduate school, it was kind of a wake-up call for me, because I noticed that I was going down that same road of unhappiness. So even though I wasn't drinking every day to like bury the things that I didn't want to deal with, I was working myself through like into the ground, and I was manipulating my body in a way with disordered eating and workout behaviors to not deal with how much I hated it. And I was trying to get awards in a career that everybody else loved, and was constantly betraying myself because my parents had betrayed me emotionally. And I'm sure we'll get into trauma and how that can look, whether it's within a family or due to like a chronic illness or whatever it is that you're facing. Like when you face hardships like that and then people aren't there to support you, it makes you think that you have to betray yourself for everybody else, right? You become the one who takes care of everyone else. I was the independent one. I was the fixer. I was the helper. I was the people pleaser. Everybody loved me, but I hated myself. And so, yeah, in grad school, it was just this, I was like, I can't live my life unhappy and die at 48 years old, like hating myself like my dad did. I can't do that. I can't live another second like that. And then my current partner, we've been together 6 years now, but 3 years ago, a year after my dad passed away, he broke up with me just because he couldn't feel himself being dragged down into the deep, dark pit that I was dragging everybody else into. That was close to me because I was so unhappy and hating myself. Like, you know how, and women tend to do this a lot, and it's not exclusive to women, but like take so many compliments from other people but don't believe them, right? So imagine that, but just like magnified 1,000 times was like what the inside of my head was like. No matter how many awards or compliments I would get, no matter how much praise or love I would get from my partners or people around me, I didn't believe it. Like I blocked it all out because I didn't believe I was worthy of it. And so, yeah, he broke up with me. My dad had died. I felt myself going down that road, and I was like, and that's when I started really this whole self-development healing journey. Getting in touch with spirituality, starting to get serious about therapy, starting to get serious about helping myself and stuff too. And even realizing that my therapist wasn't enough, and all of the self-education and work that I did on myself that I still continue to do made me realize that I didn't want to continue down the track of becoming a professor because that's what everybody else wanted me to do. And I was like, holy crap, this is what I'm meant to do. Is I'm meant to help people not turn into what my dad turned into or the road that I was going down. People aren't meant to like live unhappily or struggling because of the generational trauma they've inherited or all the conditioning they grew up with or surrounded by. It's like, I was like breaking out of my cage, and I was like, this is what I need to help other people do. If I'm feeling happier and I'm transforming my life this way, like I need to spread the word to everybody. And so I made it my mission to help heal other people. And it was really fucking scary to quit my PhD last year and to tell my advisor like, hey, I'm done. But it was the best decision that I ever made. And it's still scary a lot of days because I'm like, I work for myself and I help other people do what I didn't necessarily go to school for, but what I've been spending my whole life learning myself. And yeah, that's why I do what I do now.
Yeah. Oh my God. Such a beautiful story. And like you were saying in the very beginning, it's not necessarily like a rags to riches and monetary value, right? But it's in the quality of the life that you're having and your like spiritual growth and your emotional growth and your happiness, right? And it's so funny because like I see myself in like so many areas of your life, right? We had a very similar upbringing, very similar stories where it almost came to this, like we were doing all of these things because and for my case, it was because of my endometriosis, right? Like I didn't believe that I was worthy because I was in so much pain all of the time. And so I made all of these really poor decisions in terms of like binge drinking alcohol and dating like asshole drug addict men and like all of these like terrible things. And I had to take a good hard look at myself and be like, oh, I don't really like this path that I'm on. Like, I want to be happy. Like, who do I have to be happy? Like, what would that look like for me? And it's really that becoming that person that you want to become and making that conscious shift. So it's really beautiful, beautiful, beautiful that you've done the same thing. And oh my goodness, there's so many little things I want to chat about. Let's kind of dive into, I know you said, oh, what was it? You breaking family lines, essentially, right? Like you saw your dad going on this path and he died unhappy at 48 and you didn't want that to be your life, right? And so I feel like so many people our age are breaking these like generational trauma lines, right? Because our family, they do things that they were taught and their parents did things that they were taught. And we're like, oh, I don't like that. I don't want to do that. That's not how I want my life to be. And so we're kind of like breaking these generational trauma chains that we've all been in. So like, what was that? How has that been for you?
Fucking hard. Oh my God, that's the first way to put it. Because, and I don't know where this comes from. I'm sure there are people who are like contemplating this with the time that they have that I don't have to contemplate about this. But I think that this breaking of generational trauma lines started somewhere. Whoever sparked it, I'm so happy that they did. But it started, I think, really with people starting to look inward towards themselves and becoming selfish, as like the older generation likes to call us, right? And maybe technology was the spark for that. Maybe it was just, I don't know. We could debate about like the sociological history of it, but what is it? I mean, it's hard, right? Because this has been the way that so many people, like our parents, our families, our friends, have been behaving for so many years. And if we want to get into like the science of it, like not only is all of that like culture inherited, but all of that kind of crap is honestly written on our DNA. That's not to say it can't be unwritten, right? But there's a lot of that that's inherited, like even right when we're born. I really do believe so, and like my scientific background, I think, plays into that belief as well. But it's hard because it's like you against the world, right? So when you start to not listen to your parents or feel like what they are teaching you just doesn't feel right, and it's fighting like your intuition and your deep knowing of like, hey, this actually sucks, everything around you tells you that you're wrong and makes you feel like you're not worthy. I remember some of the first times I was speaking up to my dad at a young age and being like, you're like, why are you drinking? Or you shouldn't be doing that. Or why are you talking about me in that way? Or saying that kind of stuff. Or what you said was just racist. Like even those little things, they're big things. But any of those times that I spoke up to my dad, like he would get angry at me because I was bringing to light like things that he did not want to talk about, or he did not want to see, like, hey, you shouldn't be drinking, or hey, when you drink, you get really angry and you get stupid and it's not fun and you start yelling, and it's like, why do you need to drink to have fun? Like, I am having fun and I'm 7 years old. Like, what the hell do you need to drink for? Right. And he would respond to me with like, you're being a wise ass, like stop doing that, like stop talking about that, like children should be seen and not heard. Like you just get told by everybody around you that when you start to speak up and bring up things that they don't like or they're judging themselves for, they have a lot of emotional pain around. Like my dad protected himself with anger, and a lot of people do. I know my uncles did that, would do that as well. Like they would protect themselves with anger. Or my mom would say something like, you know, I'd ask, well, why are you telling me to do that? Or why is it this way? It's like, because I said so. And it's like, God damn it. Right. So everybody around you tells you that you're wrong. And so speaking to something you brought up of like, you know, you ended up dating many guys that were assholes and drug addicts and that kind of stuff. I dated many assholes as well. And unfortunately, I experienced I experienced a lot of sexual harassment and abuse like in my years. And I know that a lot of people who listen to your podcast probably have, just because statistically, like so many of us have. And when you speak up and say like, hey, this feels wrong, or no, this, I don't want this, you are almost like put into your place by everybody else, right? It's like, oh no, don't speak up, or no, like this feels great for me, so why the hell do you have a problem? Or like other girls or other women haven't like had a problem with this, so why do you? Right? And so you're made to feel small. And so what breaking generational trauma feels like is it's like fighting everybody else's pressure to be small so you can be you, and so you can be bigger. Like, and so you can actually not necessarily be big, but be like the size and the personality and the energy that you are supposed to be.
Yeah.
Like it's, and it also involves like losing a lot of friends, because if they're not breaking out of the same like cultural norms or the same trauma, then they are going to see you doing it, and then that's going to make them question themselves. And so they're like, no, I'm just going to stuff you back in a box, like, or like, I'm not going to talk to you. When I first started this journey, and I even started talking about like how I didn't believe that medication was a real cure for anxiety. I think it's just something, not that medication is wrong. And I know you talk about other kinds of treatments for endometriosis besides just like surgery, or besides what doctors push out as treatments. And when I started talking about that, I had 5 or 6 of all my friends from college like saying like, you shouldn't talk about that, you're going to get people to think this and think that, and blah, 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 like that you're traumatizing people by talking in that way. And it also involved like the estrangement of my family members. Like now I'm finally starting to reform a relationship with my sister. She had a very different relationship with my dad, so it was a rocky road for a few years when I started openly talking about how he was an alcoholic and his abuse towards me. She was daddy's little girl, so she didn't experience that, or as much of an extent. And so yeah, I lost my family for quite a while, and they're still not really on the same page as me, because a lot of them are still stuck in those patterns, right? So there's so much pressure to not do it because it's more comfortable for everybody else if you don't start changing the way that you behave, or you don't start fighting all this conditioning. But just because it's more comfortable for everybody else doesn't mean that you should go along with that, because I did that for my first 20 something years of living, and I ended up with anxiety, depression, unhappiness, burnout, all that crap. And going down a road of just like trying to escape my life through, whether it be through alcohol or through toxic relationships or through anything, right? Through Netflix TV binges. Like I was not comfortable with myself. And you're not comfortable with yourself when you're trying to make yourself small for the sake of everybody else's fucking comfort. And
Exactly.
it's not worth it. It's not. Yeah.
Oh, exactly. And I think that's something that people don't really talk about much, right? Is that like when you actually start to show up for yourself and you start to go down this, I guess, this like journey of being who you are and like expressing yourself in the way that you're meant to be expressed, in like a self-love journey almost, right? Like you start to actually love yourself. And so when you see other people in your life that like, you're like, oh, they like do not love themselves at all. Like they don't, like all they do is like complain. All they do is like, they're like not even trying to change their life, like it just creates this separation between you guys until they decide that they want to join you in that journey. But a lot of people don't talk about how often it is that friends and people that you used to get along with drop off when you no longer put up with that shit energy anymore. That basically is what it is.
Yeah.
So I know you talked a lot about like being hushed almost, right? So like being told to like, don't say that. You're not supposed to say that. Like, how dare you say that? How dare you? And your voice being hushed, like how much does that show up as you not speaking up for yourself in the future, right? Because I know for me, being told like, oh no, like, you don't need to say that. Like that's not right, you're wrong, kind of created this for me where I like pulled back into myself. And so I just stopped speaking up for myself. I stopped sharing things. Like I was the quiet girl in high school because I didn't want people to judge me for my own opinion, you know? And it stemmed from like family, like my family was like angry and fighting a lot, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so I learned that those emotions were not safe, right? And so
Yeah.
expressing myself wasn't safe. And so
Mhm.
along my journey, it's been this having to figure out how to like re-speak up for myself again and teach myself that it's okay and learn that those emotions are safe again. But how do you think that that contributed to your anxiety?
Oh, I was never really the quiet kid, and me not being able to express myself, my emotions at home, instead led me to wanting to always be right, right? So I was the one who was always in books, always reading, the very attentive student, the teacher's pet, all that kind of thing, because I was scared to say anything unless I knew I was right. Because if I knew I was logically right, and enough books agreed with me, then I could speak up. Right. So I was speaking always from like my logical brain rather than from my heart, because if I spoke from my heart, that was way too freaking vulnerable. Because times that I spoke from my heart, or that I like actually expressed myself, even played music at home that I really liked to play, my dad in his like drunk bouts would make fun of the music that I was listening to. And people can say like, oh yeah, you know, plenty of parents or plenty of dads make fun of the music that we listen to, and they'll make fun of the rap that you're listening to and stuff. But when you're even things like that, whether it's your music or your clothes or the things that you say, like any form of like self-expression that is squashed and hushed can have really negative impacts later on. And so, yeah, I was constantly, and I'm touching my throat because it's like instinctive, right? Because it felt like my throat was closed. And there were times, even in class, even though I knew I was like the smartest kid in class, I was nervous to raise my hand and say an answer, or to ask a question, because it's like, well, what if this is the wrong question? What if I'm going to say something and I'm going to mess something up? I was constantly worried I would mess something up, constantly worried I'd say the wrong thing, that I would look bad, that people would judge me. It's like, oh, well, she's the smart one and she didn't know that. Like, oh, what an idiot, right? So that was always in my head. And that caused me to basically perpetually need to know more so that I wouldn't look stupid, or that I could be the smartest one, and know that all the time. But that so in terms of the anxiety and the way that it contributed to it, is it was that very critical voice inside my head. So being squashed by other people and not having my emotions heard, or not being safe to be me at home, made it so that I was always worried about what other people were thinking, or worried about judgment, worried that I'd be rejected, worried that I'd be abandoned, like the way that my dad like had abandoned me emotionally. There was this very significant moment. It was my one of my concerts, I think, that like a chorus concert or something like that, in 7th or 8th grade. And my dad was supposed to be there, but instead he went to his like work Christmas party, and he ended up showing up late to the concert, like in the last couple of minutes, when I wasn't even singing anymore, drunk. And then when he met us at home, he was just like totally shit faced. And there were many times where he missed out on my softball games and all that kind of stuff, right? And so just growing up that way, it made that inner self critic very loud, because it was like a protection mechanism, right? So anxiety, really, what I've found with myself and all the clients that I work with, is that when it's really high, or when it's more severe than the average person, whatever you want to call an average person, because we shouldn't average people out. But when it's really loud, it's because we've been through a lot of shit and we're trying to protect ourselves from more pain. And so I was trying to protect myself from the pain of being judged when I spoke. I was trying to protect myself from being left behind just for being me. So if I was what everybody else loved and liked and was proud of, then maybe people would stick around more, right? If I just did enough, people would be there for me. But that's not how it works. And me continuing to betray myself and not know who I was because I was burying it, meant that I didn't really make a lot of deep connections. It also meant that I ended up in a lot of relationships that were abusive just because I was okay with not speaking up for myself. It ended up with a lot of like, when I did have relationships, when I finally found a partner that was like healthy to be around, that I was constantly questioning the relationship. I had relationship anxiety. Oh, he's going to leave me. Oh, he hates this. Is he mad at me for that? And that's what led to our breakup a couple of years ago before I started healing, and we ended up coming back together. And now our relationship is better than ever, which I'm so thankful for. But it, like, me questioning even a good connections because of my anxiety, like, led to them falling apart. So yeah, that's the long and short of it. I guess I could keep going, but let's stop there.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, like, how can, like, if somebody's listening right now and they're like, oh shit, everything she just said, like, I do that, like, what are some like telltale signs that you might have like high functioning anxiety and you don't even realize it?
I would say a really big sign of it is not being able to sit still. I had so much trouble being still, so much trouble being by myself as well. So by sitting still, I mean that, like, when I was told, like, oh, yoga would be really good for you, for your flexibility, for the anxiety that you have, and all of that kind of stuff, I was like, yoga? I don't have time for that. What do you mean? I can't, like, slow down for like a whole 30 minutes to an hour. Like, I have cardio to do. I have these kinds of workouts to do. Like, I am trying to lose weight and all this kind of stuff, right? It was like, I just need to keep going. I have all these things that I need to fix about myself. So I don't have, like, including my body weight and how I'm still not smart enough and how I'm still not where I want to be. So I cannot do a yoga class. No freaking way. Right. So that was one huge sign, was like discomfort with slowing down, even for my own good. This constant busybodiness. So anyone who says, like, who's like always busy, I would say that's definitely a huge sign. If you are, just always busy doing something, fixing something in the house, fixing something about yourself, fixing something about other people, taking on other people's stuff and doing things for a lot of others, and you're always busy and you don't have the ability to, or the desire to, like, take a few minutes for yourself, or maybe you want to take a few minutes for yourself or some time for yourself or a day or a weekend or something, but you feel guilty about it. Oh, that's a huge sign.
That's a big one
as well. Yeah. So, like, if you feel guilty about, like, sitting on the couch and doing nothing, if you feel bad about, like, not doing everything all the time, that's pointing to, like, hey, I'm only enough if I'm doing more, or if I'm working towards what I believe actually is enough. So that's anxiety and, like, low self-worth and not enoughness are all tied up in this wonderful tangle of yarn, I guess you could say, within ourselves. And so, yeah, those are some huge signs. Other ones, anyone who is burning out and you just feel tired all the time, no matter how much sleep you get. That's another huge sign of struggling with anxiety. And I burned out over and over and over again. It was like burnout crash, right? It's like, oh, well, I need to take several days off, or I need to go on a vacation to relax and feel better, and then just go back into the same, like, running myself into the ground cycles again. Yeah. So that was definitely a huge sign. Another one being, again, tied to the low self-worth, is just, like, obsessive thinking about your body or body weight or your food, like, just controlling things in other ways. So, like, if your body is not enough, like, feeling bad about missing a workout or eating the wrong way, or any guilt or shame around food, that was definitely coming up for me. And what I didn't realize that I had, an obvious sign, if you want to talk about obvious signs of anxiety, was I was having panic attacks and emotional breakdowns. I actually had moments where I would get so nervous and emotionally activated, like in my physics class in like senior year of high school, that I ended up blacking out, and I have no idea what freaking happened after that. And that was me having actually a very severe panic attack, but I had no idea. When I was 12 or 11, I would say, I had like my first panic attack, which was when my dad, he was yelling at me when he was drunk, and like my legs started shaking, and I felt like my vision blurring, and I felt like really numb. And that was a very severe like manifestation of the anxiety that I was experiencing, was just this like fear and like detachment from my body.
Wow.
Yeah. And so those are like, I guess, some not so obvious and then like very obvious signs. So it's totally a spectrum though.
It totally
And
is.
I also don't think, just like the same, which I think you have the same beliefs about endo, is that you don't need to be diagnosed to say that you struggle with anxiety or that you struggle with endo. Like no one has to like write on a piece of paper or give you a form that says like you have generalized anxiety disorder or you have endo. It's just like, hey, if you're struggling with a lot of these things, like you still get to be aware of that and like do something about it and want to change it, and not necessarily need anybody's permission also to do so.
Yes, exactly. And I mean,
Yeah.
both of them are so common, right? And I know, especially in the endo community, anxiety and endo go hand in hand because there's
Mm-hmm.
that gut brain connection, right? And a lot of people that have endometriosis have gut issues that can also lead to anxiety, right? And so I'm sure everything that you're saying right now, people are like, oh my God. And I know a lot of my clients, they're like, I can't lay on the couch and do nothing. Like, no way. I'm too much of a burden already because of my endometriosis. Like,
Mm.
I can't
Yeah.
do nothing. What do you mean? I have this whole family I have to take care of. And it's this give, 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 give. And it's because we've never really also learned to receive, right? And we're never learned to just like that balance and energies, that is so necessary. So if somebody's listening to this and they're like, I can't do that, like, no way, I must have it. Like, what tips would you give somebody, like quick tips to help them start to move forward in their healing journey with anxiety as well?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is to forgive, because we already, if you have anxiety, if you have endo, if you have anything that makes you feel like you're less than other people, um, we can beat ourselves up a lot about it, right? And endo, anxiety, low self-worth, and this whole not the whole not enoughness, they're all in the same bubble of making us feel like we're a burden, making us feel like we're screwing things up, like we mess things up, that we're not good enough, that we suck. Self-hatred gets wrapped up in there as well. And so I want to say the first thing is definitely forgiveness. So like forgiving yourself for having accumulated these anxious behaviors, or for having developed anxiety, or for having coped with it in ways that might have been self-destructive, right? So maybe having coped with it by binge drinking on the weekends, or by reaching for that wine probably one too many nights to bury yourself, or by either punishing your body by not eating enough, or eating too much because you're just trying to bury your stress in food, or by trying to disconnect from yourself by just doing anything you can to get through the pain, which might just be watching, like laying in bed and watching endless episodes of whatever thing you can find on Netflix, right? Like, so I think that first thing is just forgiveness, because like anxiety is usually developed, and all of these like negative coping mechanisms are usually developed in response to just trying to protect ourselves from pain. And so whether that pain has been like the actual physical and emotional pain of like endo, or whether it's the emotional pain of growing up with parents who didn't allow you to be you, or a society that hasn't, wherever your pain has come from, like anxiety manifests just because it's trying to help you survive in a world where it feels like it's in danger and it feels like you can't be yourself. And so it's not anyone's fault that they develop anxiety or that they have gotten endo. Like no one deserves to have anxiety. No one deserves to have endo. No one deserves to have depression or whatever soul struggle you're going through. And so I want anyone listening to this who has these struggles to instead say to themselves, like, this is not your fault. And I love you no matter what. And so even if that's really hard to say to yourself, then surround yourself with people who are loving you no matter what, who are loving you, maybe not despite your anxiety or your endo, but like, because, hey, that's something that you experienced and you still deserve love, even if that's something that you have, or that's something that you developed, or it's pain that you've gone through. So that's huge. That is step number one, is the forgiveness piece. Because it doesn't, if you try to fix your anxiety out of this thought that like, oh, I have to fix myself because I'm broken, you're not going to heal, and you're not going to get fixed. And it's also, there's nothing to fix, because anxiety is actually a natural response. Developing an anxiety disorder or developing depression is a natural response. Like, it was my natural response to having a sucky childhood and to having abusive relationships and trying to fit in and trying to find love and trying to fill the emptiness within me. And so it was a natural response. And so am I going to, like, are you going to beat up something else natural outside of you because that's like the cycle? Like, no, it's a natural response of being a human. And other tips. So beyond the self-forgiveness, I want to say the biggest thing for me was slowing down enough, no matter how uncomfortable it was. And giving myself a whole lot of freaking love along the way. So starting with things like meditation, breathing practices, journaling, and a lot of that, honestly, because being still and being with myself was so uncomfortable, because a lot of pain that I had been covering up for so long was finally like bubbling up. I had to be very like gracious with myself throughout the whole process, right? So when we're stuffing all of this stress and trauma down within our body, it can feel super uncomfortable to start to get still and to start to face it. And so a lot of coping techniques, a lot of different ones. And when you aren't able to sit down and meditate or do yoga or to write down in your journal, something in your journal, because your mind is blank, like, just realize like, hey, it's okay. There's no right way to do this. There's no wrong way to do any of those things. And to just be really, really patient with yourself and not rush the process at all of like starting to cope with stress in different ways, starting to face where that anxiety has come from. So I guess that I would call that like step number 2. Obviously not just like step number 2, because there's so many different kinds of things within there, right? That is culminated. So these aren't necessarily like quick tips.
Do this, yeah.
But
just like general
yeah.
things. And I think,
yeah,
I was just gonna say, like, I think even part of that goes into like when you experience trauma, or you experience the trauma of living with endometriosis, or going through like, I'm gonna say like abuse, right? With your dad being an alcoholic, and growing up in homes that make you feel not safe, right? Your nervous system is in like fight or flight response. And so part of that, you mentioned breath work and meditation and all of these things, is learning, like calming your nervous system and teaching your body that it's safe. It's safe,
yeah.
it's safe, it's safe, right? Because
Yeah.
when you are in that fight or flight, you're not going to be able to sit down and journal. You're not going to be able to sit down and do all of these things, because your body's like, what's happening? I'm literally under attack. Something's wrong. And so we need, part of that is really like leaning in and teaching that safety, and leaning into moving into the rest and digest is what it's called, the other side of the nervous system, where you can be calm and you can sit in your body and be okay with where you are,
Yeah. And in terms of, I guess, like quicker tips or other ways for people to get in touch with their body, especially in the beginning, like when sitting down to meditate or breathe or to journal might be really hard. Something that was super helpful to me was to take advantage of that flight response and go for runs and start to incorporate like intense exercise, like up to a point. Like I was doing it honestly past where I should have been, which is totally fine. Like sometimes you end up doing things to the extreme and realize like, oh, that's actually too much. Let me like scale it back a little bit. And so doing things like weightlifting and going for runs and starting Zumba and doing kickboxing and all that kind of stuff was actually a really great outlet for me compared to lashing out at my loved ones or drinking like the anger and the stress and that kind of stuff away. And now in the past year, what I've been doing so much more of is just incorporating dance so much more, or even just like jumping around and shaking for a little while, or even like if I start to feel that stress response or like getting really emotional, that getting activated, like while I'm out in public or something, hey, just take a few minutes in the car and like shake out your body, like shake out everything, get out all the restlessness, like, and because that flight response is activated. And once it's activated, like sometimes you just need to expend the energy. So that's why you might notice people who are nervous or who have anxiety all the time, like fidgeting a lot, or when you start to feel nervous, you might fidget a little bit, but when it's taken to the extreme, like sometimes you need to just expend that energy in a really like in a bigger way. And yeah, and that's why I teach like lots of like somatic practices or lots of energy techniques to move that energy around, because sometimes you don't need the stillness in that moment, or you're not ready for the stillness until you expend some of that energy. And teaching your body that you are safe, like involves a balance of both. And then I would say the next thing is like beyond that self-forgiveness and beyond like giving yourself a toolbox to calm your nervous system down because you felt unsafe for so many years, that's when you can finally start to really dig into unlearning some of that conditioning, or like doing types of like inner child work, or like reparenting yourself and giving yourself the love that you weren't properly given for so long. And realizing that comes from within you and not from outside of you. So that can happen through lots of mindset reprogramming, your thoughts kind of work, lots of journaling work. Happens through like actual acts of love towards yourself, whether that be like giving yourself a few minutes of just me time in the morning, or like allowing yourself to rest instead of pushing through because that's what your mind and body are asking for. But like it won't feel safe necessarily to love yourself, like if you don't kind of have all of those coping tools as the foundation, right? Because then you'll start to feel guilty, or you'll feel emotional, you'll start to feel anxious about like taking time for yourself, or slowing down, or doing things that you know are good for you and that you know are acts of love towards you. Like that's going to feel really vulnerable, because you've been hurt when you've been in that state before, and so you've created this whole shell, right? So I think that laying that foundation of self-forgiveness and coping is really important for some people, not for everybody, like before the self-love work can begin, or at least until it can get deep enough to heal a lot of those inner wounds.
Yeah, exactly. And I know like everybody's journey is going to look different as well. So I really appreciate that you said not for everybody, right? Because it is not everybody needs all of that, but some people need a little more, and it's just really, that's why working with somebody and really stepping into these practices can help so much, right? Like having somebody there to help guide you would be like, it's okay. Like you're okay. You're right where you need to be. You don't need to be any farther along. Like you're exactly where your body needs to be in this point in time,
Yeah. And so like there are people, for example, that come to me that may have lots of great coping techniques, even maybe some beyond the ones that I use for myself. But they have still a lot of that not enoughness, the low self-worth, like the lack of self-compassion that is ruling their life. And so we'll spend less time working on the coping techniques and a lot more on conditioning and inner child work and reparenting, and really starting to bring more love towards themselves, and like learning to date themselves and learning to discover themselves. Like sometimes people come to me and they're ready for that, right? But then I also have people who come to me whose nervous systems are just so activated and they feel so unsafe that hey, we have to work on the coping skills first and we have to start there, but there's no wrong place to be. Yeah. And I really like what you said about like wherever you are in your journey is exactly where you're supposed to be. Because if we go back to the self-blame, like if you're blaming yourself for where you are, that's not gonna get you to happiness or healing or the love that, or the life that you want, because you're beating yourself up for the life that you have right now. And how is that going to get you any closer to feeling better if you like hate yourself right then and you hate your life right then, right? Like there's that acceptance and has to be there. Otherwise you're just going to be like fighting yourself along the whole way and blocking yourself from what you can have. Like it's got to be an acceptance and almost like a release around like, okay, this is where I am. I may not love it, but this is where I am. And now I can take a step forward. Right.
Exactly.
Or not necessarily forward or upward, because it's just the next step. Right. Because I don't think there are necessarily levels or that I'm better now than the person I was back then. Like you're always enough as a person and as a human and as a soul, that you just might be at a different point in your journey. And it's not linear. Exactly. And there's lots of ups and downs and lots of different pieces. And there's no better person or necessarily better way to live. It's just like what's more true to you and what is key to making you happy.
Yeah. Yes. Oh my God, I love that so much. I was gonna ask, like, is there anything else you want to share? But I feel like that's a really good place to end. But I guess, yeah, is there anything else that you want to share, and where can people find you?
Yeah, anything else that I want to share? I don't think I said this, but anyone who's listening to this who is like relating to any of the struggles that I'm sharing, or just anything that like Chelsea shares, know that you're not alone. If it's the first time and you're realizing like, oh, I have anxiety, or this is speaking to me, or maybe that's kind of been whispering to you in the background and you've felt like you're alone in the desires that you have or the struggles that you have, or just like alone in your life somewhere, know that you aren't. It's just that you've probably been surrounded by people who have made you feel kind of small, and people who have not allowed you to connect to those who are meant to be by your side. And I think it's really magical that like podcasts like this can change the course of people's lives forever. Like I definitely know that there were many podcasts that I listened to where I was just like, oh my gosh, this is a pivotal moment for me, or like that's exactly what I needed to hear right now. And so hopefully that set of words, you're not alone and you're not broken, really speaks to you. And where you can find me, you can find me in a lot of places. So I mostly hang out on Instagram. So I'm sure we'll put my handle below, but it's at jessica.stephanie16. I also have a podcast, and the name of my podcast is Anxiety Ass Kickers Podcast. You can find it pretty much anywhere you listen. We'll also have that below. My website is like kind of a thing, not really a thing, but we'll
put it below.
we'll put some links below.
Yeah.
And links to any like ways to work with me. I also have a YouTube channel, so we'll put that down there. We'll get you all the ways to contact me, my email, whatever. But yeah, I would say the best way to chat with me is either through email or my Instagram. I've tried Facebook, but Facebook, I hate it. So we're not there.
One step at a time.
Yeah. So yeah, those are all the places you can find me. And I would highly, highly encourage you. Well, one, listen to my podcast because it's bomb. And so is Chelsea's. And so, thank you for listening. And also don't be afraid to come chat with me. Like, I'm not going to like rip your head off. Like, I'm just going to like shower you with love and like welcoming vibes, and just would love to chat or connect with you, in any way, shape, or form. So.
Yes. Thank you, Jess. You're an angel. That was such a fun conversation. And I know everybody listening is probably like, oh my God, thank you so much. I'm going to come reach out to her.
Yeah.
Oh, but thank you. And I'm sure I'll have you on again because this is amazing.
Oh, yay. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Bye.